Okay, perfect. So you should hopefully now be able to see my first slide, the FIDIC Contracts Expert Program. And I'm looking at the FIDIC suite of contracts today. Um, just before we start on all of that, I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about the course and a little bit about what we're doing here. Now, I've been teaching on the Masters at King's in London for 25 years. And when I started doing that, we basically used to write on a whiteboard and we had chalk on a on a blackboard. It really was like that 25 years ago. That was traditional teaching. PowerPoint came in later on. And what we used to do is hand out a written paper and use a bit of PowerPoint and use some of the whiteboard. And then, of course, COVID came along, didn't it? We've all switched to webinars. And we've got this, the cost of traveling around the world to events is high. So and my colleagues, Isan and Honkit, were very aware that you either try to get yourself to a master's course somewhere, which can be expensive, or you end up doing these short webinars for an hour or two, or maybe even a half-day conference, and there's nothing in between. So what we've developed here is a 12-week program, and it's structured. So the idea is that we have 12 lectures, slowly building on topics that are very important in relation to FIDIC contracts and claims and time and money and dispute resolution, insofar as it relates to FIDIC, and then offer those from those 12 key topics. We've got 4 tutorials which relate specifically to topics where you need a bit more time to look at things. We've got more than 20 videos. It'll be about 26, 27, maybe 28 by the time we add in the last of them. These are short videos between 15 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes on very focused topics. You can watch those whenever you want. And then we've also gathered material. Well spotted. Yes. 10th of April 2025. Good. Um, basically the materials have all been produced in March and updated in March. So everything is updated as of now. If you look at a document in the slide deck which says April, it's still relevant. All I've done is change the date on this. Everything's been produced and is up to date. So don't worry if you see a date of March and April on the slide, don't worry. It's all been benchmarked for this course now. And then as I was saying, then we've got some PDFs. So there's material we've gathered. It's open source material, meaning it's available on the web. Lots of it are written by me or my colleagues at FIDIC Elliott and some of the experts we use. And whilst it is available freely on the internet, we've gathered what we think are the best things for you to read. So there's so much material out there, but we've gathered important documents that you can look at in relation to the topics that fit the topics. So basically, if you go to this first module about the FIDIC suite of contracts, and you look at the couple of videos that relate to it, and you follow this talk, and you read the PDF materials, you should have a really good grounding in each of the topics. It amounts to about a module worth of reading and listening for a graduate study. So I've tried to develop this in a way that allows you to learn the materials and study to the level that you should be doing if you were on a degree program for these topics. That means you need to be motivated and read in your spare time. And if you're looking at the PDFs, I'd encourage you to read through them, maybe highlight them if you want to, but produce your own very short note. Type your own short note about the key points. It's the best way to learn. And although, I mean, we will give you some brief assignments and we will give you a certificate, you might want to go on and do the FIDIC test for being an adjudicator, for example. And by the time you get to the end of this course, you should be able to do that. And I think it will prepare people in a much better way than other short courses. And the other thing that we try to do here, which I know is different from short courses that we've seen, is that we talk about FIDIC and we talk about the law. See, a lot of courses only talk about what's in the FIDIC contract. They don't tell you about the case law or tell you what's going on in relation to the different laws around the world. And it's really important because, of course, in practice, if you have a dispute or you've got a question um, about a project in any of the countries that you've mentioned today, you need to think about how the law impacts on your contract, how the law affects potentially the written words in your contract. You can't have a contract in isolation. It's always going to have an impact in relation to the law. And now we obviously can't cover every law, but what we do try to do is look at common law and civil law and a little bit of Middle Eastern law along the way. So we can't cover everything, but we try to cover topics that we're able to talk about in the time available. And we're going to cover some case law that is specific to FIDIC. So even though it might relate to, a lot of it relates to common law, I'm afraid to say, but the logic of the cases we cover will be the same because I found, I mean, I mostly have worked in civil law countries in the Middle East. The logic seems to be the same. And that's really because they don't have much precedent. I mean, KSA just went past on the screen there. And of course, the reality is that you've got Sharia law there, and you've just recently had the commercial law. They had an old procurement law, which didn't say very much. And really, you can argue about everything, unfortunately. UAE law, on the other hand, the nice thing about UAE law is that they have got more in the commercial code and the procedural code. And you can look up quite a bit of case law, but only really in relation to the ICC's yearbook. So the ICC has picked out construction cases and FIDIC cases that have been reported in the UAE and Abu Dhabi. So you can see what people have done there, and by reference then to the local codes and so on. But you still, of course, in the UAE have the backdrop of Sharia law and the civil code coming from the Egyptian code originally. The Egyptian code was the first one written in Arabic, which came from the French Napoleonic code. So you can kind of follow this. The best place really for Middle Eastern law, UAE, is to have a look at what the Egyptian scholars have written over the years. Because that really is probably the best source as far as I'm aware. And this is working from, I had a partner who's now, Ahmed Ibrahim, who's now sitting as an arbitrator. We worked together for years on this when we set up FIDIC Edit's office there. Singapore law. I'm not sure if many projects are governed by FIDIC. Yeah, so, I mean, Singapore law, most of the Asian projects I've worked on don't have Singapore law. If they're necessary in Singapore. But quite often we get Singapore law as the procedural law if we're having a dispute, maybe ICC, LCIA, or typically SIAC, which is the Singapore International Arbitration Centre. You get the procedural law of Singapore. And Singapore, I think, has got a very organised legal system. It was originally common law, and it has its roots in the common law, particularly for contracts and damages and so on. So for any of you that are familiar with that, you'll find that it's really kind of easy to follow if as a common law lawyer. I taught at the National University of Singapore 20 years ago and found it not that difficult actually to understand what was happening. A lot of the damages cases all flowed from Hadley and Baxendale, if that means anything to you, which is an old common law case, which all of the damages in America flows from that principle as well. So there we are. It's fascinating to see the grassroots of common law going around the world, and then the Napoleonic civil law finding its way around the world. And they produce these two systems, which many people will tell you are very different. But when you start to look at FIDIC as a complex, lengthy building contract, what you find really is that most legal systems around the world respect the written words in a contract unless it's illegal under their system. And pretty much, everything relating to construction is fine. Interpretation can be slightly different, but not a lot different. And issues like good faith, people will say have a big impact, unlike common law where it doesn't. But in reality, of course, good faith does not let you out of the strict terms in the contract. It doesn't let you move away from missing a notice. It doesn't let you avoid termination or suspension if the words are clear. So there we are.